There is a name in our prayers this morning for healing that you won't recognize. It is Weather. Kind of an odd name, but that's her name, Weather, not Heather. Weather is a young woman who now attends college in Texas. But when I first met her in 2007, she and her mother, Ray, attended St. Martha's Episcopal Church in Omaha, where I first served as curate, which is your first job out of seminary. You go and work with another priest, and you're called a curate. So I was there for about a year and a half, and while I was there, I met Ray, who was a young single mother, and her daughter, her only child, Weather. And I don't know where the father was. I never met the father, but these two were inseparable, as you might imagine. Mother and daughter, young child. So a year later or so, I was called to St. Augustine's in Elkhorn, and for a while, Ray and Weather would attend there, but that became less and less regular, and we eventually lost touch. And then, in 2003, I was called here. And while I have thought about them occasionally, I hadn't heard from them all these years until this week, when Weather called me, weeping. Her mother and her best friend had died, suddenly and unexpectedly, and far too young. And Weather was sad and hurt and angry and scared, all the things you would expect a young person to be at the untimely death of a parent. But the thing she kept repeating over and over and over on the phone was that she was so worried that her dear mother would not be in heaven, and how unthinkable it would be if she would never see her again. Her mother, you see, had taken her own life. And someone somewhere had told Weather, like someone somewhere has told so many of us, that the act of suicide somehow disqualifies us from ever reaching our eternal home with God. Have you ever heard this lie? And while my heart was already breaking for her, this was almost too much to bear. And so I didn't waste a second in telling her that no, this was just not true. That nothing in Scripture and nothing in the church doctrine or teaching said such a thing. That it was an old way of thinking, and that the church had long ago revised her teaching, recognizing that no one would take their own life if they were not in extraordinary pain and extreme circumstances, and therefore could not be held accountable in any reasonable way. And as I said further, it was my position, irrespective of what the church thought, it was my position that someone who was in such immense and intractable pain, who sees no other better way to possibly relieve that pain, taking the only option that seems possible at all to them, that seemed to me to be something that God would treat with particular love and grace and forgiveness. Don't you think? That it was inconceivable to me that God would forever exclude someone whose life was so broken, when God, at least the way that I understand God, is the very protector and lover of broken people and wounded souls. That God had not forgotten God's claim on Ray's life. That God would never forget or let Ray go. This is our baptismal promise, brothers and sisters. And I hope that it will be a comfort to Weather as she begins the difficult task now of saying goodbye to her mother and her best friend, who became this week the most recent saint in my life. In Mexico, there's a saying that everyone dies 3 deaths. The first is when your physical body dies. The second is when your body is returned to the earth. And the third and final death is when people forget you. Doesn't that sound horrible? Like, isn't that the most horrible one? To be forgotten? Like, that to me sounds like, maybe it's just my ego, but I'm saying that would be the worst one to me, when people finally forget that you ever existed. Now, I know it must be really a thing in Mexico because of my intense studies on this subject, which consist entirely of watching the amazing movie Coco. Have you seen this movie? Is this not the best movie you've ever seen? Who here has not seen this movie? You must go rent this movie. It is extraordinary. The colors are so beautiful and bright. It's a Disney animated, is it Disney? Pixar, one of them. The animated movie. And the colors just explode off the screen. And the story is of a young man in Mexico who has this journey learning about what Day of the Dead means to their family. And he has this great journey into the after. It is really, really extraordinary. I commend it to you highly. We learned there that the Day of the Dead is bigger than skulls and masks, but mostly involves putting together a sort of altar with food and pictures and mementos of the deceased, and it's a big deal. Now, I don't do all of that because I don't believe in that in the same way, and it isn't my custom, but I think it's not too far off from what I do believe, which is that we are all stronger and better and more alive when we take time to remember those who have gone before us, who blazed a trail and lit a path for us on earth, and who even now are blazing a trail and lighting a path for us. In fact, this is my favorite image of what the church really is. All of us, across all time and space, all of us walking in groups in semi-darkness, holding our torches or our lanterns, which are really only strong enough for us to see the next step or two ahead of us. But we know where to go because we are following faithfully the voices that we can hear, some distant and some just ahead of us. Our ancestors and our loved ones, giants in the church and undecorated unknowns alike. See and ears and every weekers, all of us. Everybody headed in the same direction. We follow those who came before us, and in turn, we lead the ones who come after us. All of our voices and all of our lights leading to the one great light, the eternal and inextinguishable and unmistakable light of Christ, which is our own final and eternal destination. So today, friends, while our bodies are still above the ground, let us remember and celebrate our beloved saints. Light a candle, say a prayer, place a picture, and hoist a glass if you are so inclined. However you remember and celebrate, do that today. We are here because of them. And know this for sure. They are with God. And we are headed to God. Because the thing about all death is this. It is an illusion. It is a transition. There is no such thing as eternal death. And if God is who I think God is, then there is absolutely no escaping God's claim on our souls and God's call to our spirits. And here I differ with my brothers and sisters to the south, because I do believe that even if every single person on earth were to forget that we ever lived, even if that were to happen, God will not forget. God cannot forget. And that is the most important remembering of all. Because God remembers us beyond the grave, and God remembers us into life everlasting. Praise be to God. Praise be to God.